Beautiful Sunday evening. Welcome to the Jacobson Report. John Jacobson here with Sean Revis on KOFO 1220, 103.7 FM. We've got a special program tonight. Yours truly does a recap of the Papal Conclave as today in history, Pope Leo XIV, formerly Robert Prevost, is the 266th successor to St. Peter, an uninterrupted line of succession for the Bishop of Rome. 7 billion people watching in some way, shape, or form today in Rome. And how did this American, for the first time in history, how did Robert Prevost end up being Pope? And what will this portend for the church and for the world? We'll have all of this with a thank you to Jim and Cindy Jandrin for liferunners.org. Go to liferunners.org and get your t-shirt and run and walk for life. Help those expectant mothers and babies along the way. And also, thanks to them at Midwest Renewable Energy, LLC. Renewable fuels, it's lean, it's clean, and it's green. Energy for a strong America via ethanol. And away we go.
If I try to bring some of my faith in Jesus Christ to the public square, as unworthy as I am. And I think what's so important to undergird our discussion today is, regardless of where you are theologically, whether you're Jewish or Muslim or Protestant, professing Christian, either mainline or evangelical, whether you are, whatever your faith background, Hindu, our Jewish brothers and sisters. The thing about Catholicism is it is the world's longest ongoing institution. It has 1.5 billion, the B, adherents, and it traces that office of the seat of Peter, the Bishop of Rome. There is a documented, uninterrupted chain of succession that goes back to 33 AD. We know where the bodies are buried, as we say, of the prior popes. Pope means papa. It's really not the formal term. It's an affectionate term meaning papa. Pontifex means bridge builder when they say the pontiff. And we use those terms, but what gives the seat, the primacy, is that it is the Bishop of Rome, the bishopric of Rome. And when you think about it, in the world, the largest infrastructure that is there in terms of hospitals, universities, high schools, grade schools, orphanages, med, dent, law, nursing, pharmacy colleges, diplomatic corps. They've got their own nunciature. The Holy See has a diplomatic corps. It's recognized by the United Nations. The ambassadors, the nuncios are recognized between the Vatican City State and the United States. You've got basically all the artistic endeavors that the church has sponsored, much of the great classical music, the artwork over the ages, and of course, all these great, for lack of a better word, social welfare organizations that feed and clothe the poor. So I have found during this process the intrigue of all people of good faith who say, we need the Bishop of Rome to be a very solid person because of the history, because of the infrastructure, and essentially it's a prime custodialship of Western civilization, if you will. So I think regardless of what your religious pedigree is, it's a pretty big deal.
Well, obviously, the leader of the Roman Catholic Church, as you say, more than 1 billion with a B followers on this planet. It has moral significance. It has political significance because, again, of the sheer volume of followers. You have undertaken some study. I know you did in advance for your own radio programs in the Midwest, including on KXEL, assess the potential cardinals who could be elevated to pontiff. Well, now we have Pope Leo XIV. Give us your sense as a practicing Catholic and as someone who has done research. Give us a sense of what to expect from this new Pope.
Yeah, Jeff, it's a great question. The lead is that it's a great pick. It went far better, frankly, than I thought it would. Taking the name Leo XIV is of import. So let's peel back the onion a little bit on this. So here's some context, Jeff. The last 12 years under Pope Francis, he had many virtues. His emphasis hammering away at the mercy of God, the forgiveness, the mercy of God. Very, very important. Oftentimes, even in Catholicism, there's still that emphasis of guilt and fear of hell and things like that. And I think Francis built that bridge of the perduring mercy and infinite patience of God. And that was very, very important to the teaching and healing ministry of Jesus Christ in the sacramental life. And he did very well on that. If you recall, Pope Francis consecrated Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, as urged immediately to do so by the Ukrainian bishops when the war broke out, when Putin was the aggressor into Ukraine. Many popes in the past have believed there is a real key to the conversion of Russia from Russia's errors, beginning with warnings right prior to the Bolshevik Revolution. And I would argue that Francis finally perfectly did the consecration to Russia, and many people believe that those prayers mitigated what could have been a World War III situation between Russia and Ukraine, without going too deep in the woods here on that. He also brought in people from the peripheries. He appointed more cardinals than ever from Asia, from Africa, from some of the other areas there. And so, he did many good things. However, in terms of temperament, he could be fiery. He could be sometimes not nice. He did offend a sizable, not a majority, but a sizable, what I would call your base traditional Catholics that are very devout and almost insulting at times, and sometimes repressive at times. And I would say that after 12 years, the change is welcome, frankly. Now, none of us had Robbie Prevost on our grid. And so here's what really I think happened. Of course, you've got the conclave, and Francis appointed 108 out of these 133 voting cardinals. Francis would be deemed, not that you can reduce religion to all the politics, because faith transcends these right and left monikers and markers, but Francis definitely a liberal, much more so than Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, John Paul II, Karl Wojtyła, and he basically had somewhat of a stacked deck of cardinals. It's that the thought was that even very hard left cardinals like Tagle from the Philippines or Zuppi could get elected pope, but I think the real smart men in the room thought it would be Parolin. Parolin was Italian. He was the Secretary of State, clearly a favorite of Francis, but you have to get 2/3 of the vote to become a pope. And there's an old saying, you go in to the conclave of pope, you come out a cardinal. And that's what happened to Parolin. It really did. He was the favorite going in, but I think what happened, frankly, is there were some cardinals who thought, even though they liked Pope Francis, from a governing and temperament standpoint, there needed to be somewhat of a course correction of movement toward more of a centrist pope. And I think the cardinals on the right, who were in a minority, but along with moderates, I think they blocked Parolin. I think they prevented Parolin from getting the 2/3. So there were some conservative candidates out there, such as Erdo from Hungary, but he probably couldn't get the 2/3 of the vote because the moderates and the more liberal cardinals were the larger majority. Well, was Robert Prevost a compromise or a convergence candidate? I think he was a little bit of both, Jeff, because I think Parolin probably, they realized, had capped out at a number that was not going to get to 2/3. And so there you're in a situation where do you go from there? I think going into the conclave, Prevost already had a lot of support, amazingly, from all sides. He had the support of the liberal American cardinals, I think the conservative American cardinals. At some point during the conclave, maybe not before, but during, I think there was a coalescence along with African and Asian cardinals, out these ones from the peripheries. There had to be, to get essentially 90 votes out of 133, 89 to be precise. And this was a fourth ballot. That's a rapid result. That's a very rapid result for someone who's not a front runner. So why rob Prevost? Well, if you can't get Parolin in, Prevost would still be identified as friendly to Francis. Francis picked him to be head of the dicastery for bishops. That's kind of putting a guy in a good position also to be pope. Secretary of State's a great role that Parolin had, but Prevost got to kind of go and meet and visit with all these bishops all over the world, including these cardinals. And He's a Peruvian by also dual citizenship, an American, but he spent a lot of missionary time in Peru. He checked a lot of boxes. He's a polyglot. He speaks a lot of languages. I've noticed over the weekend, his Italian is flawless. The Latin is beautiful. He's obviously conversational in English, but being in Peru, he's got Spanish, Portuguese. So he's a very good communicator. He's been in the Roman Curia, the government. He knows the bishops. He's been in that dicastery office. He's an Augustinian, which resonates with a lot of people, including our Protestant Christian brothers and sisters. St. Augustine, they claim him. All Christians claim him. He talks so much about the grace of God and his effective, the heart of that love of God. He's an Augustinian. He ran the Augustinian order. He's a math major at Villanova, where he ran the pro-life club at Villanova. But also, he's a lawyer, Jeff. You'll be glad to know this. He's a canon lawyer. So he's got a great skill set. But I think they saw this and thought, okay, here's a guy who's not going to lurch way to the right, but he's going to tone it down a little bit, at least in terms of temperament and style from Francis. And he seems to be somebody that everybody claims to have a piece of. It's interesting, his ethnic background. His mother is Hispanic, Martinez, Spanish background there, perhaps some Mexican background. His father's side, Creole. He has African-American blood, French blood. And so, in being in Peru all those years, he's a pope from America, but in the past, they always said an American could never be elected pope because they wouldn't want to give, the president's already the leader of the free world. They wouldn't also give the papacy the Americans. But I think part of this is very interesting. I think the left thought, well, the new pope, Robert Prevost, has pushed back on what would be considered the right-wing stance policy-wise on immigration, on climate, on the death penalty. So some of the liberals are happy with those positions. And of course, as a Catholic, we all want a clean environment, right? And, we all want to treat the alien, the widow, and the stranger in our midst well. These come down to policy considerations for how do you do that. But I think what's interesting, there are some tells here. Prevost has done, you talk about the first 100 days of Trump. Prevost has had a magnificent first 100 hours. He is coming in as the great unifier. I'll give you a few tells on this. He gave a nod right out of the gate on the loggia when he came out. He was out there in the Mosetta. And if you remember, when you saw Pope John Paul and Pope Benedict, they always came out with a red Mosetta to bless the crowd. Bergoglio, Francis, came out in white vestments. He was not wearing the Mosetta. That was really a break with tradition. He did not live in the papal apartment. He lived at St. Marta. Pope Leo is going back to the papal apartments, which I think is a great idea. People wanted to be in St. Peter's Square, see the light on in the papal apartment. In some ways, Santa Marta was kind of, they had to square off an extra floor for the Pope, and it kind of complicated things there. It's actually simpler in some ways to go back to papal apartments. It's a style choice, but I like the adherence to tradition there. He did the blessing in perfect Latin. The optics, he led the congregation in St. Peter's Square in the Ave Maria in Latin. Yes, the Pope is Catholic. On Sunday, he sang, what a great voice. He belted out the Regina Caeli prayer at noon in beautiful Latin. He gave the triple Gloria Patri et Filii et Spiritui Sancti prayer 3 times, the repetition there in the Latin. Already some of the traditional Latin masses have been restored in a couple of major churches there in Italy. I think he has the character and the temperament to be a little more diplomatic, a little more measured, a little more thoughtful, perhaps. He's a good listener. I think he's a unifier. Taking the name Leo the 14th is very interesting. That's what encouraged me. Leo the 13th was a great pope from the late 19th into barely the early 20th century. Jeff, he was trying to figure out how to repel communism while at the same time maintaining the rights and the dignity of workers, because the Pope knew that Pope Leo XIII, that communism was not the way to go. But on the other hand, if there weren't amendments made to protect the rights and the dignity of workers and just wages and salaries, that the world may go totally to that bad side, to the communistic side. Leo threaded the needle very beautifully in his teachings. And I think, Prevost has talked about we're in an AI age now, all the technology. How do we address it? And he's not one to run into a ghetto and hide. He knows we have to address it head on. So I think, for those of us that like to put things I hate the political analogy because theology is so different than politics, but think of it this way, by analogy. The Catholic right would be like the Republican conservatives in 1952. They would want Robert Taft to be their nominee. The Democrats would want a hard leftist like Adlai Stevenson with Eleanor Roosevelt backing him. And what we got was Eisenhower. We essentially got a centrist who was very likable, who can unify people like Ike did with Montgomery and Patton and de Gaulle and all those guys. I think Prevost can do that. And some of it's just his Chicago background. He was one of those kids as a young boy. He played priest and turned the ironing board into an altar table. The lady down the street prophesied that he would be Pope someday. He would disarm bullies with kind rhetoric. Part of the reason he can't grin widely and do guffawing chuckles and laughs is that he sustained a jaw injury when it was crushed by a car when he basically pushed a young girl out of harm's way from oncoming traffic that was about to hit her, and he took the auto to the face, basically. So this is a good man, a holy man who loves Jesus, and I think that goes to the heart of it also. And I mean, I did not have the Pope, a guy named Father Rob from Chicago, being on the bingo card. I mean, this just shows you the surprises. This is as shocking as when Wojtyła came out as the first Pole and the first non-Italian in 500 years in 1978. There's some cute things. There's pictures of Prevost, now Leo XIV, at the White Sox game, the World Series game in 2005. He's on there in the crowd, shot up there with his nephew or whatever watching the game, or with his brothers watching the game. He's got two regular brothers who remind me more of Mike Ditka and maybe the Blues Brothers, but you've got this, he's on a mission from God, from Chicago, and you know that he's got empathy for the downtrodden and for the martyrs, because by virtue of being a Chicago White Sox fan, you are downtrodden and you are a martyr. And I think the thing is just that amazes the Bears fans is that Chicago got a Pope before they got a guy who could pass for 4,000 yards a season in the NFL, So I think this is really good. I mean, yes, the Pope is Catholic. I think he's going to be a great net plus for us, Jeff, because there's so much in the social media age. There's been so much intrigue and fascination about what the church is doing, such that there are jokes out there that the Pope Mobile is going to be a Ford pickup truck, and that McDonald's are going to be sprouting up around Rome, and that Dick Wolf's going to create a new TV series called Chicago Pope, and even from a Trump standpoint. People are saying the smart play made by the Vatican to get an American Pope to avoid tariffs. But, I think that this Pope will be very diplomatic. He will speak loudly on issues like immigration and climate when he thinks things need to be said. But I think he will not be perhaps so much an in-the-face Pope as Bergoglio Francis was, and maybe a little more tactful, a little more measured. And I think right now that is good. I think the last 12 years were good in many respects, but maybe chaotic. And I think people want to chill a little bit and maybe return a little bit more low key. And I think right now I have seen more goodwill in the last 100 hours being put up by the disaffected. It's a minority, but a very important minority of traditional Catholics that just felt to some extent beaten down by the last 12 years, almost like there's a sigh of palpable relief and a return to some of the traditions. And so, Jeff, I'm shocked. I really am. I thought out of the stacked deck going in, there was no way to essentially get a centrist cardinal. I thought it might be Pizzaballa from the Holy Land because he's legendary there. He's trying to, be in the middle of the Palestinians and the Israelis and the Christian community in Gaza. He offered himself up, Hezbollah did, to replace the child Israeli hostages. Many thought that he might be that middle candidate. I think in many ways we still need him there in the Holy Land, and he was maybe a bit young to be Pope at 59 or 60. That would be the prospects of maybe a 30-year pontificate. That might scare some folks off. What if, it's a tenure that you don't want to be there for 30 years. So it's amazing that it's an American, Jeff. You and I, going back, would have thought never possible for an American to be Pope. I think the Peruvian aspect that he was in Peru for so many years made him in the minds of the South Africans and Latin Americans a Pope they could relate to. I think that the orthodoxy of the African cardinals probably made them think, hey, it's not bad to have more of a centrist here. I see the German clergy already. They're the most liberal leftist brand in Catholicism right now. The Germans don't seem terribly happy. They think that Prevost, Leo, probably isn't going to give them what they've wanted. And I think the salient virtue of Prevost is, I think he's absolutely going to head off any talk of schism or a break. I think he's Eisenhower in the center, and I think he's going to be able to hold up both the left and right wings. And so that's why I think this was a home run hit, Jeff. I really do.
John Jacobson is the host of the Jacobson Group, Saturday mornings at 7:30 on KXEL. We're going to take our bottom of the hour break. When we return, more on the other side with Mr. Jacobson as KXEL Live and Local continues on a Wednesday on News Talk 1540 KXEL, where Iowa comes to talk. Welcome back. KXEL Live and Local continues, 8 o'clock hour on a Wednesday. I'm Jeff Stein. We continue via Zoom with John Jacobson. Mr. Jacobson is the host of the Jacobson Group, Saturday mornings at 7:30 on KXEL. Listen to podcasts. Go to kxel.com/Jacobson, Jacobsen. Before the break, you were talking a bit about some of the political implications or comparisons, and one thing I found quite striking, and again, to set the table, your pedigree is of a man of faith. You are a Catholic. You've supported Catholic education through positions in school boards, etc., and it's something you speak freely about on your program and elsewhere. There's a real similarity, is there not, to how Americans have been voting, especially for president lately, where we have this mass in the middle that decides elections. And so you will get these wild swings, if you will, from Obama to Trump to Biden to Trump. And our friend Gentry Collins calls these change elections if you start including Congress in the mix, because that toggles back and forth. So is it a matter that Francis was the right pope for the right time in terms of, again, not wearing the typical vestments, etc., pointing out the inequities in the world and making very clear political statements to a point that those who gathered said, well, I like that, we don't get 60%. Sure. Well, I like that, we're not getting 60%. So let's have something that's the same but different.
Jeff, that's a very, very intuitive comment that you just made. John Paul was known for his missionary travels and his outreach and that forceful ability to evangelize. Pope Benedict was the great teacher, the biblical scholar, the teacher from the chair. Bergoglio Francis, the weak, the downtrodden. And I think they found somebody. I mean, everybody's saying, well, is going to carry on a lot of what Francis did. Absolutely. Leo XIV is a big supporter of Vatican II, the changes made in the church in the 60s. He's not going to go back and repeal Vatican II. And you know, that's where the lion's share of the church is right now. But I think you also have a very serious intellectual in Prevost, who's an Augustinian like Pope Benedict, who's going to teach, and perhaps with clarity like Benedict, sometimes being the good Jesuit that he is. I was surrounded by the Jesuits for many years in my education. They're great teachers, but, you know, they are players in terms of being able to work in difficult situations that involve nuance and sometimes shades and threading needles. And there was some ambiguity with Bergoglio Francis. I think there might be a little more clarity called for now. But I do think he's going to be very much like a John Paul. He reminded me of John Paul singing the other day. He's belting out the Regina Caeli, the Pater Noster, the Ave Maria. And I think he's combining all of those. And you're right, there's an old saying in Rome, after a fat pope, they get a skinny pope. After a skinny pope, they get a fat pope. And I think here, it's very interesting. These guys are hard to pigeonhole. It is not lost on me that although there was a rebuke by Prevost on one of his Twitter posts, a rebuke of J.D. Vance and one of his comments, that nonetheless Robert Prevost was a registered Republican who voted in Republican primaries in Chicago, who has one of his two brothers who's quite an unabashed Trump fan. And one of his brothers, I don't know which one, said that Prevost is a centrist. And I think you're going to see in the line of John Paul and in the line of Benedict, you'll see a pope who's against the death penalty, who will emphasize things like climate and, social justice and humane immigration programs. But you're going to see a pope that is Catholic. He's going to stand up for traditional marriage. He's going to push back on the gender identity revolution. He's going to be staunchly pro-life. And I think that on balance, you're right, Jeff, he's going to incorporate basically an amalgam of the last 3 or 4 popes. But it is telling. He did not take the name John or Paul, which is identified with the more progressive, or Francis II. He did not take that name. He also did not take the name John Paul III or Benedict XVII or Pius XIII, which would have been a real conservative tell. Leo's a great name because Leo, again, going back to Leo XIII, rights of workers but anti-communism. And then Leo the Great, very much a defender of everything taught by the Catholic Church about Jesus Christ. And so I think the name is good. He's definitely setting a pace. It's kind of cute to see the reactions in Chicago of family members and friends. There was a great Instagram video, Jeff, of some younger women, and they're on the phone just literally squealing and laughing and shouting at each other. These are siblings talking because the Pope is Robbie Prevost, Mom's old boyfriend. I mean, he dated girls, and, one of the girls that he used to date, her daughters are now saying, Bobby Prevost is the Pope, Mom's former situationship, from when she was a girl. So it's neat to think that we've got a guy that goes to White Sox games and, dated a girl from Chicago and, a math major and went to Villanova. And it's just amazing. You talk about the surprises out there. But, Jeff, I think you hit on it right. The pendulum always does swing. And I think there was a sense that it had really swung too far to the left. And that even more so than that temperament needed to change. There was a group of Catholics that felt almost bullied during this last pontificate of 12 years that were tradition-minded. And so, we need to breathe with both lungs. We need everybody on board right now. And I think where Parling maybe came in with some baggage, there are some that did not like the concordat that the Vatican set up with China. Cardinal Zen, the 90-some-year-old cardinal, came in from China. Communist China allowed him to go to the pre-conclave. He was too old to vote in the conclave, but he did not like the deal that the Vatican made with Communist China. And it is interesting, again, if people say, well, this new Pope, Francis loved him, he's a commie. Well, if you're a registered Republican in Chicago voting Republican primaries, you're not a commie. Now, yeah, he'll push back on Trump on immigration policy. But again, it might be on policy, but everyone agrees that a nation has sovereignty over its borders. That's right out of the Catholic Catechism. Every nation believes you have to defend people from crime. How best to do that? The church takes a stance against the death penalty. How do you deal with climate? We're all conservationists. Shoot, I'm a conservative, but I'm a Boy Scout. I was planting trees before most of these earth huggers were, Jeff, when I was in Boy Scouts. The question is always, how do you do it, pragmatic? But I really think that I have not seen it. Here's the moment. If Blaise Cupich and Tobin from the American Cardinals on the left and Cardinal Burke and Cardinal Dolan of the American Cardinals on the right can all be enthusiastic about the same fellow, again, he's partially a compromise, but more than that, people converged on him. It was a convergence because I think, again, a fourth ballot to get to 2/3, if you're a dark horse, that is truly a phenomenal and shocking result.
Thanks again to Jim and Cindy Jandred for sponsoring us at Life Runners. Go to liferunners.org, get your t-shirt, Run and Walk for Life, and help expectant mothers and babies along the way. And we thank them also for their work at Midwest Renewable Energy, LLC in the East Central Plains of Nebraska. Ethanol, renewable fuels, energy for a strong America. It's lean, it's clean, and it's green. This is John Jacobson for Sean Revis saying, catch this podcast on KOFO.com. And in the meantime, until we see you again next week, be safe, be smart, be good, be strong. Love Jesus Christ. It's the 5th Sunday of Easter, and God bless us, everyone. Bye-bye.